In South Africa, in one of the small villages, there lived a young man named George Michael. George was a brave, intelligent, and creative man, but he always felt lonely. He was born into a very poor and unfortunate family and faced problems such as a lack of food, water, and electricity, as well as limited access to education since childhood. But George never gave up on trying to improve his situation. By studying and striving to acquire new knowledge and skills, he gradually improved his situation. He was proficient in English and was able to work as a translator in an international company. One day, George was invited to go to a remote village in Africa to work as a translator for an English medical team that had come there. The team was on a mission to provide medical treatment and relief to the local people. George arrived at the village with the medical team and got to work. He communicated with the local people and, with effort and language recovery, was able to be recognized as an excellent translator. However, during this time, strange and bizarre events occurred. George began to see hallucinations and terrifying dreams that were caused by the nature surrounding him. He felt that something was not right there. He became scared and terrified and could not sleep at night. One night, George was asleep when an unknown voice came from behind him. He woke up and looked but saw nothing. He went back to sleep, but when he opened his eyes, there was nothing there except a black hand and a demonic figure that came down from the wall above his head. George passed out due to fear. The next day, George told the medical team, but they told him that he was experiencing hallucinations due to fatigue and job pressures and that there was nothing real about these hallucinations. But George still felt that something was not right. Over the next few weeks, George quickly turned into a strange person. He could not get rid of the terrifying hallucinations and nightmares that he had experienced during his waking and sleeping hours. He was referred to a psychologist by one of the doctors on the medical team to try to find answers to these problems. The psychologist examined George and told him that the hallucinations and nightmares were likely from the traumas he had experienced in his life and had kept in his mind. But George did not believe this. He felt that something was threatening him. One night, George was alone in the house where he lived. He fell asleep but felt that something was moving towards him. He opened his eyes and a dark and ruthless figure entered the house from behind the door. George passed out due to fear. The next morning, George was found in a very bad state. He was severely weak and was transferred to the hospital. After examining George's condition, the doctors realized that he had been under the influence of a strong mental disorder and needed intensive treatment. George was hospitalized for several weeks and received treatment. After spending some time in the hospital, George's condition improved, and he returned home. But no one could tell him what had happened that night. George always remembered that night and never got over his fear. He could never tell others what had happened that night and always remained alone. He continued to search for answers to his questions and could never find them. From that point on, in the village of George, scary stories began to circulate about a demon that attacked people's homes at night. People would tell terrifying tales of something attacking their homes, and in most cases, these attacks occurred at night. People were afraid of these attacks, and no one could say for sure what was happening. George was still looking for answers to his questions. He was trying to connect the problems and terrors he had experienced throughout his life with what he had seen on that night. He was searching for the truth and wanted to understand what had happened. One night, George decided to go to a house that was related to the scary events involving the demon attacking people's homes. He went alone and entered the dark and quiet house. George searched for any signs of the demon but saw nothing. However, when George went to the bedroom, he saw something that thrilled him. He found a tape that appeared to have been recorded on that night. George played the tape and began watching it. In the film, a group of local people can be seen fighting something that appears to be a demon. George followed the demon and found it hiding in a cave. He entered the cave and began to pursue the demon. But when he reached the inside of the cave, he was confronted with a terrifying scene. He realized that the demon was actually a human who seemed to have gone insane. George was terrified and tried to escape, but at that moment, the insane human threw him to the ground and attacked him. George tried to escape from him, but he couldn't. In the end, with the help of the local people, he managed to defeat the insane human. After that incident, the scary stories related to the demon came to an end. But George was still looking for answers to his questions. He was trying to find more information about the insane human and decided to go to a village where the insane human lived. He talked to the locals and managed to gather more information about the insane human. When George arrived at the insane human's house to learn more, he was faced with a terrifying scene. He found the insane human inside the house and realized that he was seeking revenge on the community that he believed had wronged him. George tried to talk to the insane human and convince him that this was the wrong approach, but he couldn't. In the end, with the help of the locals, George managed to defeat the insane human and take him to a treatment center. From then on, George no longer pursued answers to his questions. He realized that he needed to find a way to help others instead of searching for answers. He decided to work as a psychological counselor and help people deal with their problems and difficulties. But unfortunately, George quickly realized that helping others and solving their problems did not create the desired sense of satisfaction for him. He soon realized that his own problems were just as severe, and once again he was searching for answers to his questions. However, George was looking for a way to accept and manage his problems. He went to a psychologist and was able to address his problems with counseling. But these problems soon left George vulnerable to a mental illness. He faced severe depression, and with more effort to manage it, he could barely escape it. George lived alone at home, and despite all his efforts to accept and manage his problems, he went to death alone. On a cold and dark night, due to anxiety and depression, he committed suicide. The local community, who always knew him as a very good and respectable person, was shocked by his death, and the bitter news spread quickly throughout the village. George was always looking for answers to his questions and a way to help others, but he never found a way to help himself. He succumbed to suicide alone and in a state of despair. George's death was very sad for the local community because he was always a good and respectable person and always sought to help others. They will always remember George and have fond memories of him in their minds.